A child watches an adult shout at someone, then hears that same adult say, "You must learn to control your temper." A teacher humiliates a student publicly, then begins Monday's lessons with a speech about kindness. And across millions of homes and classrooms today, adults are demanding behaviors from children that the children have never actually seen those adults practice. That contradiction is not new. If you're a parent, if you're a teacher, you're an educator, you're a guardian, you need to watch this. Come closer. Let's watch this to the end. See, more than 60 years ago, a psychologist named Albert Bandura conducted an experiment that forced adults to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps children do not learn behavior only from the instructions we give them. Perhaps they also learn by quietly studying what we do. And to investigate that possibility, Bandura and his colleagues used a 5-foot inflatable clown called Bobo. Yes, a clown. But what happened to that doll would become one of the most famous stories in psychology. Now, in the early 1960s, many psychologists explained learning mainly through rewards and punishment. If a child repeated a behavior, people often assumed that someone must have rewarded it. If the behavior stopped, perhaps it had been punished. So Bandura was not entirely satisfied with that explanation. So he wondered whether people could acquire a new behavior simply by watching someone else perform it. No reward for the observer, no long lecture, no written instructions saying, when you see an inflatable clown, please attack it professionally. Just observation. So Bandura worked at Stanford University with Dorothy Ross and Sheila Ross. Together, they designed an experiment involving 72 children from Stanford University's nursery school. The children were between 3 and 6 years old. Before the main experiment, the researchers observed the children and assessed how aggressive they already appeared to be. This was important because they did not want one group accidentally filled with children who were naturally more physically expressive, while another group contained children who treated every toy as a respected member of the family. So the researchers then divided the children into different conditions. Some children would watch an adult behave aggressively. Others would watch an adult behave quietly and peacefully. Then come the third group, they would not watch an adult model at all. So one child at a time was brought into a room in one corner. The child was given attractive activities such as stickers and potato printed materials. In another corner sat an adult, model with a collection of toys, including a Tinker Toy set, a mallet, and the non-famous Bobo doll. And in the non-aggressive condition, the adult calmly assembled the Tinker Toys and largely ignored Bobo. Follow me. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting, no punching, no strange argument between a grown adult and an inflatable clown. But in the aggressive condition, the atmosphere changed. Remember the aggressive, the atmosphere changed. After playing quietly for about a minute, the adult turned towards the Bobo doll. The adult knocked it down, sat on it, punched it repeatedly in the nose, hit it, do all manner of violence on it. Then the mother struck it with that's the adult now struck it with the mallet, threw it into the air, and kicked it around the room. The actions were accompanied by a lot of aggressive phrases. I won't want to say here. Now, this detailed matter. This really mattered. Now, Bandura was not only interested in whether the children would behave aggressively, he wanted to know whether they would reproduce distinctive actions and expressions they had specifically witnessed. Okay, so the children were never told. Watch carefully because there will be a practical. No, they weren't told that. They were simply present, just there, observing. After about 10 minutes, the adult left. The child was taken into another room containing highly attractive toys, fire engine, dolls, a spinning top, and other play materials. Naturally, the child wanted to play with them. Right? Children. But after a short period, the experimenter told the child that these were the best toys and had to be saved for the children. Imagine showing a child the finest toys in the building and then saying, please step away. These are for people who have not arrived. See, that part of the procedure was deliberate. The researchers wanted to create mild frustration before moving the child into the final room. So there, the child found both aggressive and non-aggressive toys. The aggressive toys included a mallet, dart guns, and a 3-foot Bobo doll. And the non-aggressive toys included crayons, dolls, cars, animals, and a tea set. Then, the researchers observed children who had watched the aggressive adult were more likely to reproduce the aggressive actions they had seen. Some struck the doll with the mallet, some punched it, some kicked it or threw it into the air. More strikingly, children copied several of the model's unusual actions and verbal expressions. That was the important evidence. A child hitting a toy might not prove imitation. You see, children can invent that behavior without assistance. But when children reproduce distinctive sequences and phrases demonstrated by the adult, it became much harder to argue that observation had played no role. The adult had left the room, but the adult's behavior had remained. So, the children who had observed the quiet model generally displayed less aggressive behavior than those who had watched the aggressive model. So, the original study also found differences connected to the sex of the child and the model. Let's say boys, for example, reproduce more imitative physical aggression than girls, particularly after watching the male model. However, those patterns were not identical across every form of aggression. The central finding was clearer. Children could learn new patterns of behavior by observing another person, even when that person was no longer present. So, there was later experiment, and later experiment extended this question. Then comes Bandura and his colleagues showed children aggressive behavior performed in real life, presented on film or enacted by a cartoon-like character. Children could reproduce behavior witnessed through a screen as well as behavior demonstrated by someone physically present. Follow me. We're getting something. That finding feels particularly relevant today. Yeah. So let me come to today's work. A child no longer learns only from parents or teachers or neighbors. The child observes influencers, film characters, online comedians, gamers, and strangers whose loudest moment has been pushed onto a screen by an algorithm. But this is where we must separate Bandura's actual findings from the exaggerated version repeated across the internet. The Bobo doll experiment did not prove that watching one aggressive act permanently turns a child into a violent adult. No. They did not demonstrate that every child copies everything they see. They also did not follow the children for years to establish that striking the doll may cause long-term criminal behavior. The experiment measured behavior in an artificial laboratory setting. It is a laboratory setting shortly after children had observed an adult attacking a toy, designed to bounce back when struck. A Bobo doll is not another human being, and hitting an inflatable toy is not identical to harming a person. So there are also ethical and methodological questions. The children were deliberately exposed to aggressive conduct. They were frustrated before entering the final playroom. The presence of aggressive toys may have suggested what kind of behavior the situation permitted. So, some children might also have believed the adults wanted them to imitate what they had seen. Then come modern researchers. Modern researchers would examine those concerns carefully. So, the honest conclusion is not that observation automatically creates permanent violence. No, the stronger conclusion here is that observation can teach children what actions are possible, how those actions are performed, and what behavior appears acceptable within a situation. So Bandura's later social learning theory eventually developed into social cognitive theory. It went far beyond the simple idea that children mindlessly copy adults. People pay attention to some models more than others. They remember particular actions, they consider possible consequences, they decide whether they are capable of performing the behavior. Rewards, punishment, status, and self belief can all influence whether an observed action is eventually reproduced. In other words, children are not photocopiers, but they are witnesses. They notice who receives attention after disrupting a lesson. They notice whether powerful adults apologize. They notice whether shouting wins argument. They notice whether a parent tells the truth only when telling the truth is convenient. So this is where the Bobo doll experiment stops being an old psychology study and becomes a mirror. So a teacher says, "Do not interrupt," while repeatedly talking over students. A parent says, "Put the phone away," without looking up from their own screen. A school leader demands punctuality but arrives late to every staff meeting. Then the adults become surprised when the children learn the demonstration instead of the instruction. See, we often behave as though children hear our values through their ears but cannot see our contradictions with their eyes. Bandura's work suggests otherwise. If a child watches an adult handle disagreement with ridicule, aggression becomes one available script. If the child watches an adult pause, listen, and set a boundary and also remain calm, that becomes another script. And this does not mean adults must become flawless. In fact, pretending to be flawless may teach another damaging lesson, and that mistake should be hidden. That's what the child would actually take. And children also learn from watching an adult say, "I was wrong." They learn when a teacher repairs a conversation after speaking too harshly. They learn when a parent regulates anger instead of pretending never to feel it. They learn when leaders accept consequences rather than searching for someone weaker to blame. Modeling is not only about showing children perfect behavior, it is about showing them what responsible human beings do before, during, and after imperfect moments. That may be the most uncomfortable legacy of the Bobo doll experiment. Adults like to imagine that our instructions are the curriculum and our behavior is merely background activity. But to a watching child, our behavior may be the most convincing lesson in the room. The doll was inflatable, right? The lesson was not. So before asking what is wrong with the behavior children are displaying, we may need to ask a more difficult question. Who showed them how it was done? That is the question. So don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Who taught education this? It is an educational documentary with your favorite host, Tom Phonics. And I will see you next time. Please comment below. Let me know. Let me hear your thoughts. Share your thoughts in the comment, and of course, share these to your educational community group. I will see you next time.